Okay, welcome everyone. This is Social Medicine Grand Round sponsored by the Rangell Prosecutorial Endowment and the UCLA Center for Social Medicine. I'm glad to see everyone today. I usually start these things lately by saying, well, I'm sorry we can't be here in person, but at least today you didn't have to splash through a lot of rain to join us. I just wanted to take a few minutes to in starting to let you know about our upcoming events. We have two exciting speakers in February. Lauren Cubelis from University in Berlin, who will be talking on about the shape of psychiatric outcomes. She's an anthropologist. And that's on February 19th at 10 a.m. A somewhat unusual time because she'll be coming to us from Berlin. On February 26th, a week later at 12:30, Patricia Garavici from the University of Pennsylvania will be talking about race, class, gender, and the unconscious. And then on April 17th, we're starting the first of a series of 3 webinars on mass incarceration in the pandemic. That's a Saturday. The event will begin at 10 a.m. And for this first webinar, we will be featuring legal scholars Sharon Dolovich of UCLA, Hadar Avaram of UC Hastings, and prisoner advocates James King and Jane Dorotic. So we have a really full program this spring, and we hope that many of you will be able to join us. Look for in your email boxes for announcements. For today, for our discussion of the poverty industry, it's my great pleasure to introduce Daniel Hatcher from the University of Baltimore. Dr. Hatcher got his JD at the University of Virginia and is currently professor of law at the University of Baltimore. He's worked extensively at the Legal Aid, University of Maryland Legal Aid Society and the Children's Defense Fund, and is director of the Civil Advocacy Clinic at U Baltimore. And he specializes, among other things, in children's law, healthcare law, and poverty law. So without further, one more thing. As you may have already noticed, this meeting is being recorded. And if you have questions as we go along, please do put them in the chat and we'll try and catch up with everybody when we're ready to take questions. So without further ado, I'll turn this over to Daniel Hatcher.
Thank you so much, Dr. Melderman, for the whole program. It's an honor to join you all. Thank you for spending time with me on a Friday. I know if you're anything like us, a lot of times Fridays are when faculty tend to goof off a little bit more than other times. And I'm just getting back from sabbatical last semester during a pandemic, which is kind of odd timing, and I'm still kind of shaking up the dust. I'm cheating here with a virtual background because I'm probably disclosing too much. As I was describing earlier, I'm actually in basement. I'm with my teenagers, and I'm downstairs where there's some really cool artwork, but might be a little bit on the edgy side for this presentation. So I'm using a background today, which I use all the time. But who knows? Maybe I should bring it up, and I'll be more the cool professor, right? So, a little bit more about my background, just because I try to hold on to this. I try to write and do advocacy and teach, and this sort of divide but connection between theory and practice, right? Which we've all seen. Can you all hear me okay? Okay, great. And I feel lucky in that right now in my teaching load, I teach a clinic where law students, typically in their 3rd year, are learning through the representation of low-income clients. So a lot of the issues that I write about, we also, through my students, I see happening in real life. It also allows me to see
LTSS social insurance program. There's also opportunities with the new administration to expand Medicaid funded home care and home and community-based services, as well as
it's all right. The background sounds fascinating to me.
And we have a lot of partners in this work. There's a lot of acronyms here. So I won't go through all of them, but just to say we're working with
I
all
might
the
actually, let me see, I'm co-host. Let me see if I
of
can figure this
LCSS.
out.
So people with disabilities, as well.
All right, but sorry, I'll try to keep going. But anyways, I try to keep a grounding between reality and theory, right? And a lot of times those merge, but sometimes they don't. And I remember back in my first year of law school, we talked about civil procedure and ethics, and a lot of the discussions in especially in your first year curriculum, and how different it is once you actually go inside a courtroom, especially a more crowded, what might consider a lower level courtroom, right? That is serving low income individuals, right? So what we talk about as due process usually doesn't look like due process when you get into rent court, right? Or you get into the high volume consumer docket and the like. So that, like some of the issues I encountered both while teaching, when I was a legal aid lawyer, I represented children in the Baltimore foster care system. I remember my first day in court, I represented, I think, 16 children in an afternoon, and hundreds before the year was out. And those experiences, I guess I would describe, they still haunt me. And I still try to hold on to those. I still feel guilt from a lot of the past, because I was part of a foster care system that I think is failing, and still is, and the broader systems around that. So I like to have the opportunity to stay engaged with students, and through students, through real clients, to keep engaging me and why I'm trying to do what I'm doing. So this book that I wrote, I guess it's been about 5 years ago now when it came out, really came from some past experiences I had in my direct advocacy of foster children, and some policy experiences I had while I was at the Children's Defense Fund. And one of the issues I'll spend some time with you all on, I'll break down the big picture themes, get into a little nitty gritty a little bit with the time that we have. But one sticks out to me because of my past advocacy regarding this issue with foster children, and how the agencies that actually exist to protect foster children are actually using the children to take their resources, right? And I haven't been able to shake that since I learned about it, and I've been driven in my research. I think sometimes people have asked me what my, overarching scholarship agenda is, and I think, like, when I encounter things that piss me off, I want to do something about it, right? A lot of times. So there's a lot left to be fixed, but also I believe, I try to be optimistic. I think through awareness, through the work that you all are doing by increasing awareness, that good change is possible. So I'm going to try to pull this up. Bear with me with the technology. Everybody with me so far? All right, is that working for everybody? Let me know if not. Okay, so I'm going to step through some of the big picture themes here, like we're talking about. So I really encountered, this started with a couple issues from my past. I encountered this issue regarding foster children and Social Security benefits. And also, while I was a legal aid lawyer, I was asked to legal aid in Maryland, the Baltimore office, got a small amount of money, very small. I mean, I think the time was only like $50,000 from a local foundation, to start up a new practice that would provide representation to low-income, absent parents, and child support related issues that affected employment. And this was a bit confusing to me at first, and novel to me, because in my experience when I was a legal aid lawyer, I did a general practice poverty law in addition to representing children in the system. And the family law work, the extent I did, I was typically representing the custodial parents, usually the mothers, but not always the mothers. And when child support was an issue, child support was something we were pursuing, right? And as an advocate, as a lawyer in zealous advocacy, you go after those who aren't paying their child support, and you go after them hard. So that experience was really eye-opening to me in terms of I guess, unpacking some issues that I wasn't previously aware of and challenging my own assumptions and throughout the practice. And that delved into some of my writing as well. So I started encountering more and more issues where I sensed this tension between agencies that exist to serve also seek to exist, right? This idea that we have human service agencies in the broadest sense of the word. Most of my research has been at the state and county level, but certainly this comes up at the federal level as well. But that agencies that are supposed to, their mission, right, is to serve, protect, maximize the welfare of their beneficiaries. And I would encounter, I continue to encounter time after time after time again, examples where the agencies are instead using their beneficiaries to serve themselves, right? And I think this is a tension. Sometimes I try to self-reflect, and we teach that in the clinic. I think we all have this tension at a certain level, both as individuals, as educational institutions, as research institutions, if we work at nonprofits or for-profit companies, right? Where are we working towards our stated mission for the cause, right? Or are we doing it for self-interest? And what we're doing. When I put out the book, was I working on a book to try to get some kind of glory or to be better known, or was I trying to increase awareness and fix things, right? The tension is always there. I think you can't get away from that tension, but through self-reflection, if you're aware of it, right, you can do a better job of staying on the right side of that tension. With state agencies, many, and through many of the practices, I think these agencies have lost sight at the leadership level. When you get up to the higher ranks of some agencies, things increasingly become about maximizing revenue, right? And it's so easy to forget about the core reason for which the agency exists. All right, so this is an actual quote from one of the foster children I worked with. Now this was Ryan, his first name is named in the case. I went up on appeal to the Court of Appeals of Maryland, and that's Court of Appeals is the Supreme Court of Maryland. And he was one of these children who had his survivor benefits, in this case, confiscated by the state. He had no idea. So I'm gonna describe a little bit about how this practice works, get into a little nitty gritty of this particular example, and then we'll go on to others. So, sorry, first I forgot the order of which I have this. Before, this is an example, of a lot of the practices what I'm going to discuss with you are part of a broader economic term and structure. I'm sure many of you have even written about this, right? The idea of fiscal federalism. It's certainly centerpiece in Medicaid and with the federal foster care 4E program. Really the idea of just shared governance and shared financing between the federal government and the states. The general idea is that the federal government is supposed to have more money, more power. States are supposed to be closer, the counties even closer to the individuals for who have the needs. So if we have the states and counties run the programs, but a lot of the money come from the feds, right, then that's the idea of the structure. The problem I encounter, I'm not an economist, but the problem I encounter with a lot of economic theories is that we forget about the human aspect, right? And us humans tend to be a bit of a mess. So a lot of times economic theories fall down when we realize how human failings come into the picture. And fiscal federalism, from what I'm seeing, is one of them, right? In terms of the structure, it makes a lot of sense. But I have not seen in the economic analysis discussion of how states and counties are failing using their own selfish motives, right, to pursue federal funds and then redirect that away from intended purpose to general state coffers, right? Medicaid is increasingly used as a general revenue source for many states, instead of making sure all the money goes to Medicaid intended purposes. So this is an example I like to use, just some numbers. You can see this is dated, and there's been some changes as of a couple of years ago with Families First legislation. But just to give kind of a quick view of some numbers, and I don't intend like using these kind of numbers to be to reach a conclusion, right? Because there's a good amount of great services that are provided beyond these numbers. Anybody who's worked within or around the child welfare system knows this, but they ask some questions, right? When you see these ultimate numbers that for an individual family, if you just took this money, you could have $3,700 per month per child, right? So what good could be done with that? And I think as a process of self-reflection, the system, if you will, we all as part of the system should be reflecting on that, right? Is the business that we're building, to provide services, and I use business as a broader phrase for including the government side and the private side, nonprofit and for-profit, all of it, right? Are we doing right by our mission, right? Or are we serving ourselves? Are we seeking to exist through this process? All right. Getting into foster care in the first book. I'm working on a second book now, and I can hit on that if I end up having time as we get towards the end. I used a hypothetical foster child by the name of Sarah, as you can see with the $sign, to step through some of the different funding streams that happen, right? And this is not comprehensive. I get into more in book 2 that I'm working on. But you can see a lot of these streams that are coming from Sarah. And again, is the money being used to help her, or is Sarah providing a source of the revenue, right, to fuel the system that is serving Sarah? It's some of both. Again, I think that tension is inevitable, but too often that I've seen in my research that the agencies are moving to the wrong side of that tension. We'll go through some of these specific examples. All right, back to the specific example that I was alluding to at the beginning. So I encountered this when I was both at the Children's Defense Fund, and then I actually represented 2 clients directly that I filed lawsuits against the state of Maryland on their behalf. And then I also served as co-counsel for amici and the other case of Ryan, who I quoted before. What's happening here is that foster care agencies are largely underfunded. There's a lot, we could write books and books and books and books about all the issues around foster care agencies, but to simplify it, foster care agencies are underfunded, and they need to use the money that they have in better means. I'm in favor of at least the principle behind Families First legislation that happened at the federal level to encourage more services to avoid the need of foster care in the first place. But you have a situation where you have cash-strapped agencies that are increasingly looking for other revenue sources, right? Because states aren't providing enough money. States, red states and blue states alike, aren't raising sufficient revenue through general taxation. So the states are looking for more outside resources, and the agencies are as well. And this is just one of the examples in which the agency is used as a source to bring in more funds. So what agencies have been doing, California does this, every state engages in this practice, but some, not all states, are actually using revenue contractors, like Maximus is a big one. And this particular assessment is about Maryland. So Maryland started working with Maximus first for an assessment report, and then to actually help provide the direct services to identify more children and to maximize the number of children in foster care who are determined disabled or who have dead parents, essentially. So the state could apply for either SSI disability benefits for the children or survivor benefits. And the general idea, like in terms of maximizing the receipt of Social Security benefits for foster children, is a good thing. If you have more revenue, more resources coming in, that can benefit the children. But what the agencies are doing and the parent states are doing is instead using the children's resources. They're taking the resources from the children to fund themselves, right? And I've heard arguments from the agencies that say, well, we need more money. We need to take the kids. And they've actually argued this in litigation, including a case that went up to the Supreme Court. We need more money to help all children. So we take the Social Security benefits from some of the kids so we have more resources to help all of the children. If you back up from that a bit, at first blush, it's like nonsensical at best for an agency that exists to serve vulnerable children to take resources from those vulnerable children to help them. There's other ways to fund things, and that's not the way we should be funding foster care. Foster care children should not have to pay for their own foster care. Also, that's not what's happening, because foster care agencies in states have a legal obligation under state law and federal law to both provide and pay for these foster care services. So what's happening when the resources are taken from kids, it's not creating more revenue to the foster care agencies, but it's replacing otherwise statutorily required state spending, right? It's supplanting rather than supplementing, those who know the terms. This is some of the language from the actual contract I have. I have the actual contract I could share with folks if you want to see it. The contract actually describes foster children as a revenue generating mechanism that I've done a lot of public records requests to various states, which is interesting in itself to see how states respond, and some states are faster than others. New York was one of the worst in terms of trying to get documents from them. This is another example of a proposal of a contract document from another revenue contractor by the name of Public Consulting Group. I quote several in the book, but using language of data mining and algorithms, and literally what they're doing is they're helping the states figure out, how do we find these children? How do we apply simpler process of using algorithms to determine which children to apply for benefits for? And also, how do we rank them? Like, how do we say which children we're going to apply for first? And you dig deeper into the information, and they decide which children to apply for benefits first, not based on need, right? Not who has more disabling needs or more needs because of a parent who died, but which children are going to bring in the money, more money for the state, the fastest and the easiest, right? That's the whole triage process that they go through. All right. So, I'm going to try to move this. I'm pausing here because I'm moving the window of view all as I can see the slides. So, and this is just one example. The states are also taking, in addition to Social Security, survivor benefits, and disability benefits, states are also taking VA benefits if a child had a parent who died in the military. As you can imagine, that's a lot smaller number of children, but it happens. It's literally on a most recent contract between Maximus and San Francisco, the agency there, where they include veterans benefits as one of the things they're targeting. The Maryland Foster Care Agency, there's a regulation in Maryland that they're going to go after everything, all resources from foster children. Nebraska, I found a regulation that even allows the agency to take a foster child's burial space if the child happens to have inherited one. All right, and I can't see. I've seen, like, every once in a while I see like a couple. There might be a couple chats. If anybody has questions for me during this, feel free to raise a hand and interrupt. I'm not at all strict and feeling like I need to wait to the end. I like an organic discussion, but I can't see the chats as I'm in share screen. At least I don't know how to. I'm a bit of a Luddite. So this is an example moving into some other categories here. So nursing homes, or else use Medicaid. Is a huge funding source in which these diversionary tactics are used. The amount of money regarding foster children and Social Security benefits is a best guess regarding the Congressional Research Service, CRS, is maybe around $250,000 per year. My guess is more like, I'm sorry, 250 million per year. My guess is probably more like 500 million per year, because they don't have complete numbers. But Medicaid is just massive in terms of the amount of money that is being diverted from intended purpose. And in writing this book and in the research that I've done, I've been torn with it, because I'm a fan generally of expanding Medicaid and Medicare. I personally think Medicaid should become Medicare, right, and cut states out of the picture. Medicare is much more efficient in operations than Medicaid, but coverage is better in Medicaid. So really merge the two, but cut out states. Really the only thing states do in the Medicaid program is a conduit for the money. And what they're doing with this is siphoning off a lot of the money that flows from the federal government ultimately to the providers. So nursing homes are one of the different entities that are often used in some of these revenue maximization schemes. This kind of shows some of the numbers and an example that was out of New York. And if you follow the numbers here, the idea is that Medicaid, I don't want to tell you all things you already know, but Medicaid is a matching grant program. Maryland's an easy state to think about because it's a 50-50 match state. California probably is too. So in Maryland, if $50 of state money is spent on Medicaid eligible services, you claim $50 match from the feds. You have $100 total that are supposed to be used for Medicaid services. So here you can see you have this grant, you have this match happening, right? Between the county's being used for the state match and the Fed, right? So it ends up with 200 million total. And they use this illusory bed tax scheme and intergovernmental transfers where initially it goes to the nursing home. So if we stopped at, if I was able to point, if we stopped at that 202 million at the nursing home, that's where it's supposed to stop, right? In terms of the services that are then provided, right, at that entity, the funding is supposed to go at the entity for which the Medicaid is claimed. But instead, 182 million goes back to the county. The county gives another 81 million back to the state. So the county and state is using that, right, as a general revenue source rather than all of it. You can see how much and how little goes to the actual provider in that example. There's example after example of that. So this slide, this image that I have here is an actual image that was used for a training materials with the Georgia Department of Human Resources talking about federal foster care streams. And it speaks volumes just in the images that they decide to use for their training for those people who are working within the child welfare agency in terms of federal foster care funds under Title 4E. But the question, nursing homes, are they maximizing care or are they maximizing profit, right? And the examples are alarming. So this is one example I use at the top in Indiana. Some of the research they used. A bed tax is something that is often used for this, where they'll tax the hospital or a disproportionate share hospital or a nursing home. The money will round right back, a round trip of money. The money will go back to the disproportionate share hospital, the nursing home. So it's an illusory state spending. There's no real state spending. But that round trip of money will be able to claim the federal match, right? Indiana, they called this bed tax a quality assessment fee, which is ironic because Maryland ranks worst, right, in terms of the a general nursing home rankings when you see a lot of indicators. And one that I've looked at a lot, it receives an F grade consistently. Maryland, I live in Maryland and I get, I write about a lot because Maryland is, depending on which year, is often considered the richest state per capita in the country. You compare it to Mississippi, the poorest state per capita in the country, they tie in terms of the grade of nursing home quality of care. Maryland also has engaged in the same practice, not as much as some other states have, but they increased the use of its bed tax scheme to divert of the amount of money they're claiming from the feds, 35% of the federal aid away from the nursing home. Another example of nursing home revenue schemes that I've done a good amount of research on. And if anybody's interested in digging into this, there's actually some reporters.
Are you done with the drill?
There's actually some
Joe,
reporters
put it away.
in Indianapolis who have done wonderful research on this and are writing some great in-depth pieces. There's a local municipal organization, agency in Indianapolis, the Health and Hospital Corporation, right? It's a municipal agency. They run essentially health services in Indianapolis in the county in which Indianapolis exists. So this HHC, found out a way that they started buying up all around the state of Indiana, not just around Indianapolis, but corner to corner around Indiana, privately run nursing homes, buy the licenses to run the nursing home. So on paper, they now own the nursing home. So now they're government run, right? But then they rehire often the very same companies from which they just bought the licenses to keep running the nursing homes, right? But now through the legal ownership, at least, they were able to start triggering and claiming higher Medicaid reimbursement rates. Now, again, with Indiana being often a failing state in terms of the quality of care, of nursing home quality of care, if there's a way to get more money to improve quality of care for our vulnerable older Americans in these homes, and I'm all for it, you know, like, and I'm, you know, like, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. If there's even some gaming that's going on there, fine, right? But what's happening in Indiana when they use these nursing homes, right? They took almost all of the resulting increase in Medicaid claims that they took and used it to build a huge, really nice hospital system in Indianapolis. Now, at least that's a healthcare purpose. We need good hospitals, but that's not how you're supposed to fund a hospital in Indianapolis, right? You're not supposed to do it on the backs of poor nursing home residents all around the corners of the states of Indiana to engage in this practice. Indiana is not the only state who's discovered this, and this is starting to roll out more. You're seeing massive scale investment. I'm sure some of you have probably researched this at some level with private equity firms investing in either individual homes or the companies that own individual homes. The story of Manor Care is fascinatingly disturbing, or disturbingly fascinating, whichever way you look at it, in terms of that. And then more recently, you're also seeing a trend of what's called real estate investment trusts, REITs, that are buying up companies that run either nursing homes, or they also run residential treatment centers for youth, right? Again, further monetizing commodification of vulnerable citizens. And that also provides a level of distance from humans, right? It's even more stark in terms of the business aspects and how they dehumanize the humans for which these operations are supposed to exist. And it also provides a layer of protection from liability, right? Where it shields more of the liability from the REITs, because you have the owners of the business licenses who are then running things, and the REITs really just buy the property. I've started to do at least research on that if anybody's interested. School-based Medicaid, another example, right? So again, using Medicaid. So as I'm sure, as most of you all know, school-based Medicaid can be used in schools and as a crucially needed resource for schools to better meet the needs of disabled students who need more assistance with special education services under the IDEA, right? So that's a good thing. But when it's used as a ploy, right, in order to maximize school-based Medicaid and to divert it to other needs, that's not a good thing. That's what New Jersey has been doing for years. New Jersey actually created a structure where they require each school district to work with their private revenue contractor, again, by the name of the Public Consulting Group, in order to work towards maximizing the number of children who are receiving and can apply for school-based Medicaid. Right? The schools are punished if they don't meet quotas, and the punishment is a reduction of other school funding, other state funding, sorry, to the schools. Right? And then once these Medicaid funds are claimed, only 20% max, is probably more like 15%, you know, of those funds actually get to the school district, right? The rest is kept by the state and funnels right. You look at the budget documents, goes right to the general state coffers. Now, once money goes into the general state coffers, it might be used for schools again, but it might be used to build a state. You know, who knows, you know, how that money is going to be used, or to build highways. This is not the way that money is intended to be used. Child support, I mean, I could talk for hours about this, but just, you know, a lot of people don't realize that much of what we call child support isn't actually owed to children. There is a very unfortunate history to the child support program. There's a huge unfortunate racially inequitable impact of the child support program, and the history in terms of the terminology that's used, including deadbeat dads and welfare queens, how the program is developed, and it's causing a lot of harm. Somewhere between now, and I've seen different numbers, between 25% to half of the total national child support debt, unpaid child support arrearages, is actually owed to the government, not to children. So this happens both in when a family is receiving welfare assistance, public cash assistance, now under Aurora, before that, AFDC, TANF, the program, and also when children are in foster care. The states will pursue something called child support against both parents, but that is then taken and used and enforced to pay back the cost of the foster care proceedings, which, as you can imagine, can cause a lot of harm to low-income struggling families who are desperately trying to reunify with their children. Children in foster care do not come from well-off families. All right. This is something you all probably have researched a lot, right? And I use some, pretty quick terminology here: drugging the vulnerable care of money. So the pharmaceutical industry ain't small, to say the least, and they work broadly with state agencies. There's been a lot written about this in the past. There's been a lot of good news coverage, including in California, including in some reports in Texas and elsewhere, the use of psychotropic meds on individuals in a vulnerable circumstance. And two good examples of that are nursing home residents and foster youth or use in juvenile justice facilities, right? A lot of times what we've read in these either research papers or in the news stories are that essentially, to simplify it, a lot of times the psychotropic meds are used to sedate either the elderly or the children, to make them cheaper, easier to manage. So you need fewer staff, and it's especially problematic, has been especially problematic in the private for-profit organizations, but it certainly has happened in government-run facilities as well. I'm moving, I know, at a pretty quick pace here because I want to leave a lot of time for questions and comments, because I hope to learn from you all with this. So this piece leads in a little bit to my next book that I'm writing about. Is not only are the agencies profiting from the vulnerable citizens in which they're supposed to be serving, right, and the companies, right? The poverty industry is not just the private industry; it's the collaboration with government actors, right? Both of them seeking to raise revenue and profit from the vulnerable. Justice systems have as well. And again, there's been a lot written about, and there's been some positive movement on this fact regarding fines and fees, other charges that are brought against low-income litigants, including youth and adults. But courts, increasingly have, even though there's been an effort to push back against what we might call debtors' prisons, where people aren't actually incarcerated for owing monetary fees, right? Because in the Constitution, in every state constitution, debtors' prisons are now supposed to be unconstitutional, but practically you see it still happening a lot, where people are incarcerated for debts. Multiple states have pushed back to sort of reduce the actual incarceration, but some still use a form of contempt to do that. And it has not gotten rid of the fees in a lot of those situations. Some states have, I believe California has moved in a positive direction on this regarding youth, in terms of charges in the juvenile system, but not against adults. And even in those states who are moving in the right direction with youth, it still hasn't gone nearly far enough. This is just one example of many. Alabama, literally, there was a story about a judge literally telling litigants to cross the street, go sell their blood, and come back with money, or they're going to jail, right? Poor debtors in Mississippi have been forced into penal farms to work off court fines at a rate of $58 a day, right? All right, I'm gonna wrap up with my slides for there and open it up, but I know I talk a mile a minute, and I can revisit any of these issues. I wanted to make sure and go through the big themes, but the biggest, I guess, theme for me is, again, if I were to go all the way back to the beginning, is mission matters, right? And this comment and question: agencies that exist to serve also seek to exist, right? So this isn't going to go away. I do think there are structures that can be in place that can make it much more possible that we're true to mission, both as individuals and as entities and organizations, right? I am deeply concerned with the increase in privatization. I'm not a fan of privatization of governmental services, but with that, the examples I was talking about and I've written about regarding agencies working with revenue contractors, Maximus, which even sounds bad, in order to take children's resources. I'm a lot more concerned with what the state agency is doing there than the for-profit provider, right? Maximus is a for-profit company. That's their mission, is to make a profit, right? The foster care agency, that's not supposed to be what they're about, right? They exist to maximize the welfare of children in their care. And they're literally seeking out disabled children and children with dead parents to take their money, right? People, and that's a bit of a spin, but it's an accurate spin if I'm willing to make that statement. But I'll pause. If anybody has any questions, please open them up, and I'll saw a hand from Greg. I'm going to stop sharing for now, but I can come back for any of this. I think I can stop sharing.
Greg, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hello, hi, thank you for this talk. I listened to your talk and recently read Death of Despair and the Future of Capitalism by Juvenile. I'm detecting a similar kind of narrative, at least in terms of how public institutions are captured essentially by elites, people with money and power already. And one of the examples that they use in Death of the Despair book is the master agreement of tobacco settlement between states, in which basically the idea was that tobacco companies owe damages to the American people by basically poisoning us for so many years. But rather than, this is what Adina and Kay say, rather than use that money to actually put it towards righting the wrong, redressing the grievance, the states then just use that money as general revenue to cut taxes on the wealthy. So it becomes a mechanism by which the suffering of the poor and working class is sort of used to subsidize tax cuts on the rich. So I'm wondering in your examples where some of this revenue is being redirected into general revenue, if there are any patterns that you've identified in which this is actually kind of the mechanism that it's being redirected into the revenue so that the wealthy don't have to pay their fair share of taxes, and that the collapse of these public welfare institutions is kind of part of it. Maybe you could look at it as part of a more general strategy of upward redistribution of wealth.
I think it's a great question and comment, and I completely agree with you. And that's a very good example of it. You see similar, sometimes either class actions or sometimes big payments, even recently during COVID, right? A lot of these funds that are going on, how much of that has been misused, and the vast majority of it we'll never know, right? In terms of how quickly and where this money is going. Even with the tobacco payouts, so much of that we don't know. We know some. Now we've seen some pretty stark examples, but it's a great question. And I agree. I think it does. Likely, if you take Virginia, right, which is one of the states which even promoted their prosecution, if you will, of participation in the class action, and kind of bragging about this is how much money we got for our state. Very likely, in terms of the ultimate receipts of those funds of Virginia, ended up benefiting the tobacco industry in Virginia more so than it benefited those who were harmed by the tobacco industry. So it's a striking point. I have not done, or I've not tried to do the research to more clearly draw that connection, right? I think it's a fascinating question of whether it's possible. It needs to be somebody smarter than me in order to do that. But I think it's a great question. It's, as I'm sure tracking these numbers is really, really hard, because when you get to local level or state level, in some states, if you just take the Child Welfare Agency, or if you take the State Department of Labor, right? Any state service, right? In some states, it might be run at the state level. There's a state agency that monitors the contracts, is really more involved in this. And sometimes it's more devolved to the county. Sometimes it's devolved even further than that, right? So it's a challenge in Florida, not only is it devolved to the county level, with the child welfare offices, most of the counties in Florida have contracted out, not just like these revenue contractors, but the entire child welfare agency function to private providers. So now you have a private provider, a private company that is further contracting with other companies to engage in this work. So, you know, it's alarming, but then to find that and then back it up, right, to what you're talking about is a fascinating question. It's a big task, but I hope it happens. My next book, I'm looking more at the broader not just juvenile, the broader justice system, and asking some of these same questions that you're asking in terms of where's the money coming from and where's it going. And I'm particularly concerned with evidence I'm finding that there are perverse incentives for the justice, but including the courts themselves in chasing these monies. Anybody else have questions, comments? I see a hand from Maxwell Hellman.
Sure. Sorry, Ippy, I saw you on mute too, but I'll go ahead.
Go ahead.
Thank you
sorry,
so much for this talk. Very interesting, and my apologies about the being unmuted when I first came in.
Oh, it's all right.
So UCLA School of Law last year, I think, had a very interesting event where they brought in people to speak about scams that are happening, for-profit scams around getting private conservatorship of older adults and taking away their rights and then spending down their assets. And I guess I wanted to ask about the difference maybe between what you're seeing with adults versus children, and like legally what the various constraints are, the rights that are afforded to adults versus children as dependents, what kind of different opportunities but challenges that presents in these kind of ways of using people to channel money through them for profit.
It's a great question, and it also raises like this difference between, as you mentioned, like guardianships and conservatorships. So you can have this corruption and fraud, you know, misuse, taking advantage of a vulnerable individual at the individual level, right? So you can have an individually appointed guardian for an older adult, right, who's then doing that. But then it also happens wide scale. Like one of the examples I've referred to is in New York is it's Westchester County, if I'm not getting the name of the county correct. But there was a story in the paper where they found it was actually a foster care social worker who ended up getting access to the child's bank accounts, right? And then that money were survivors' benefits from an adoptive mother who died of cancer. So the child's mother dies of cancer, right? The social worker, who's like, talk about a position of trust, figured out a way to get into the bank account and steal the money, essentially. And there, the Attorney General's office gets involved, the state gets on, everybody, and they're putting out a press release talking about, we're going after the bad guy, we're going to stop that. Meanwhile, the county, the entire county of Westchester County has a contract with these private providers to not just go after one foster child, all of them, right, who have these same survivor benefits and take them, and they'll litigate it. In terms of the legal barriers, it's a fascinating question. I've done a good amount of litigation on this particular issue with foster youth. I've also, like when I used to represent individual youth and in the child welfare system, there's practical barriers with attorneys who are handling cases, often with caseloads, right, that are huge. That's not new, it's in the criminal justice system as well. And the foster care system, there's a heightened difficulty often with confidentiality of the system, in terms of, like, if you're engaged in individual litigation, in order to get that story out, tell your story, a lot of times that is muted, right? In terms of if you don't have client permission to tell the story, you can't, like, the press can't get into the foster care proceedings, and most states, some states are starting to open. But then also, like, it's the challenge for both sets of populations, and I see similarities, vast differences, but obviously similarities, and I mean, there's almost some disturbing poetry to it, with where you have, individuals who are at the state of vulnerability at life's beginning and life's end, who are being taken advantage of. And you have the people who are, or organizations, either at the individual fraud level or organizational fraud level, are those who are usually able to do it by entering a position of trust. So they gain this guardianship, relationship through the courts, or they become the representative payee of their benefits. They become, the agency and guardians of the children in that respect. And then they're abusing their trust. It's gross, to use a legal phrase, right? In terms of what we're seeing. And I think that's a good point, because the legalities of it are a challenge, but a big practical problem I see is just most people don't have lawyers. Like most of the children and the civil side of things, they're appointed either a guardian ad litem or a lawyer, in these cases, but they've got huge caseloads, right? And you often by contract, those lawyers are restricted in terms of the types of issues that they're representing the children on. They're not looking beyond the general review hearings in which they're going. And like my first day in court, 16 kids in an afternoon. How much true advocacy can you provide for those children in that situation? Same thing happening for older adults in nursing homes. Most older adults in nursing homes don't have lawyers at all. The few that do, they again are carrying huge caseloads, usually legal aid lawyers and the like. But it's I represented, through the clinic, we represented a woman in Baltimore who was in one of these larger privately owned nursing home facilities, and it was an illegal eviction that was happening. Now she's difficult at times, and I hope I'm difficult when I'm that age, like at some point we earn that right. And this is a nursing home, it's supposed to is getting all this money, that's why they exist, is sort of help individuals who are in a difficult stage in their lives. But they were illegally evicting her. They literally dropped her off at a homeless shelter that didn't even have overnight care, right? Without her medicine, without her wheelchair. Now she could walk some, but needed the wheelchair mainly, right? And in terms of what was happening there. And then, she went back and forth from that shelter to a hospital, kicked out again to an unlicensed group home facility, like all across Maryland. There are all these sort of like halfway houses, if you will, for the elderly that aren't licensed. The state knows this and isn't doing anything about it, right? And it's basically just a, like a rundown apartment in a house, to put it probably nicely, and not getting the services they need there. So back and forth. And it took only just because she was lucky enough to have a lawyer that we were able to eventually get her back into the nursing home that she was kicked out of. The vast majority of people in that situation, you never even hear that story.
Philippe, I think you had a question.
Hi, how you doing?
You're muted, Philippe.
Oh yeah, sorry about that. Thank you for this depressing talk on this high stakes issue. And for
my kids give me a hard time. It's like, Dad, don't you have anything positive to talk about? Yeah.
And I wanted to tell you that for me, it was really useful to hear such a broad coverage of so many different types of social services, to show me the massive routinization of essentially what's white collar crime and racketeering. And for, when most of us are just working in a single field, here, often serious mental illness or incarceration, we sort of think of our field as exceptionally grotesque. But what you're showing us that it's just business as usual in the US. I was wondering if you could set it globally. How does the US compare to other more social democratic countries, or to more right-wing countries, or even to those countries that get dismissed as klepto governments? Because essentially you're very humbly, you're making us realize that we should join the nation of klepto governments.
It's a huge grift, right? I almost feel like the way to fix all these problems is I need to figure out how to join a subreddit and invest in GameStop, right? Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I appreciate the comment, and thank you for the comment. I try to do both a little bit. I try to let myself get narrow, into the nitty gritty, but remember to back up, because what you're saying is absolutely right, and I'm guilty of it all the time. Where it's so easy to put the blinders on, right, and just dig into your issue of the research and advocacy, no matter what piece you're looking at. And it's awfully easy to think that's the only thing that exists in the world. And there's a risk actually of even almost competing, with the other harms, and sometimes on policy levels, people will try to do that, say, well, if we don't fund, if we fund nursing homes, we can't fund foster care homes, and it's just a false narrative that happens. It's a great question regarding the problem globally. And I have not done that research in any depth. I've talked to some folks. I know Maximus is in multiple countries. I would say, like, in terms of the industrialized countries, the US is one of the worst, if not the worst, in this process, but it's changing quickly, and I think many different countries are following our lead, and not in a good way, in terms of the growth of the partnerships with these companies. And it's not just the partnership with the companies, it's the government organizations, the government agencies increasingly feeling like they need to view themselves as a business. How many times have you heard that phrase? We need to run like a business, right? Well, I don't want foster care to be run like a business. It's not about making profit. It's about maximizing the welfare of the children. Mission matters. If your starting point mission statement is maximizing profit instead of maximizing the welfare of those you're supposed to help, it ain't hard to imagine that harm's going to result from that, right? And that's what we're seeing. So when we look at the UK, which is, they're very proud of their healthcare system there, but there's been rumblings in the UK of concern with maybe even eventually contracting out or privatizing the NIH, right? I think that's deeply concerning. Even when they like, you dig into the data, and I can tell as I'm talking about this, I barely have data of what's even happened now, where they're saying we still have this national government-run system, but you look behind that, they're already privatizing, right? Even though, like, it's like Medicare Part C, right, which is still supposed to be government-run Medicare, but it's all through private-run HMOs, right? So it's big, there's a lot of money that's flowing with these programs, and I think as you see increasing pressure on government entities, both here and around the globe, to find sources of funds through other means, this is a way that they can really hide it, right? Like most people, even when they know this, they can't understand it, or they can't describe it to somebody else, in terms of what's happening. So, and it's happening so fast, it's almost like the last year, right? How did we keep up with everything in the news? It's like there were 12 grifts a day, so by the time you're covering one, there's been 12 more that happens. So it's alarming, but I think our best defense is awareness, and the research you all are doing is crucial, and I don't want to diminish. Like, I think you got to go deep. So getting narrow is necessary, but as you're narrow, like as you pointed out, I think very well, remember to pause and back up. Remember to see the forest from the trees.
Thanks, Dan. If I can jump in, and just ride off that comment. I kind of just wanted to ask you, right? So once we're aware, then where do we go? It just, and I appreciate what you said earlier, that I kind of want to say this is due to privatization and sort of subcontracting to for-profit vendors, and but you make the point it's more complicated than that. And what you just said, I think, gets closer to it, that it's not just privatization and subcontracting, but it's this internalization of a business model by public institutions that have actually a mandate to care, yet they're being told they have to make money while they try to, take care of people. So, and that's like a fundamental sort of characteristic of neoliberalization, right? Is this the sort of this economization or a financialization of everything, right? And so, if we were to, I don't know, if we were to sort of try to look for a cause or of this widespread grift, right, in social welfare, because it's, I think part of it is mission drift, but I think then the result is what, sort of training people in ethics, and I don't think that's the solution, right?
Right.
I mean, certainly there's some of that, but
public pressure can help. You know, if more people knows, if you get good news stories out there, you can shame people into doing the right thing.
What can be done about this? You know, the way to really, I think, regain an ethic of care, right, is to take out this business model and actually have a model of trust, relationship. I mean, these sort of very simple concepts that are at the root of care, right, and of therapeutic relationships. Yet when you're actually working in these systems, as many of us do, you actually see how hard it is to sort of see those happening a lot of times.
Right.
So I guess, given the scope of your work, it is really impressive to hear about all these examples and cases. I mean, where should we be directing, you know, our activism and our action to really get at the root of where this sort of erosion of accountability is coming from?
Well, I'm seriously going to still look into Reddit as the answer to that, but you know, it's and you know, I say that only half jest. You know, getting, you know, different ways to get news out and to have community organizing. You know, community organizing now looks a lot different than when Obama did it. You know, in Illinois and Chicago. So, like, you know, using these various online tools is important for community organizing, both to increase awareness and to push back against the grift. But you know, I think there's risk as you do step back, as you're indicating, when you see the massive scale of it, you can almost become frozen, you know, like, and feel like there's just nothing we can do about it. But I very much think we can, you know, and I think, like, that's where I think, you know, back to, I think it was Philippe's comment and question, like it's not one or the other. You need to both be narrow, like, while pulling back. Because then if you go narrow, like, if you see all the interconnections, you know, of the good and the bad of what's happening, and it's almost like it's not organized, you know, it's like this spider web, you know, if you will, of grift that's happening. If you can just zero in within, like, if you're working in the justice system or like a mental health or both, you find an issue that you're passionate about, right, and you're knowledgeable of, and you want to increase your knowledge of, you dig in, right, and you start to improve, you know, through your research, through your advocacy, through your teaching, you know, that issue. Now, like those webs, you're starting to fix one of them, right, and the ripple effects can go both ways. I don't mean to get, you know, kumbaya about this, but, you know, I've always loved skipping stones, right, because I love ripples, you know, like, and ripples can be both negative or positive. And, you know, if you start causing positive ripples, you can start to unwind, you know, some of that massive scale grift. But, you know, once you mentioned it, like, it's very much about the sort of embracing of the business mindset. And it's not even, you know, like, I joke with what happened, you know, recently with in the news, and this is what just yesterday, right? It already feels like old news of Reddit and GameStop and the hedge funds. Like, capitalism isn't even real in the US. It's not real capitalism. You know, it's capitalistic corruption, right? It's not a free market. There's no such thing in the United States. So, like, you don't even have true capitalism, right? So you have to bridge from that. So what's happening when they bring in the business mindset is a business mindset of corruption, you know, and it's disturbing, you know, like, but, you know, we have lots of tools, you know, like with our reading, with our research, with our writing, with our advocacy, with connecting with the press. You know, I'm in conversations with a guy now who's a journalist for the Marshall Project, who's written some great pieces. And, you know, I talked to him 2 years ago and, you know, a year before that. And, you know, sometimes I'll start to think there's a story and then it dies off, but he's come back to me again. And I think there may be another story, you know, coming out on one of these issues. And he places sometimes in Post, New York Times, you know, some big outlets that can have an influence, you know, in terms of getting the story out there. So I'm, you know, I'm sometimes I feel frustrated by all this, you know, but you know, we have to, you know, like it's you know, even like if we go back to what just happened with our coup attempt, you know, not to get political, but I think a coup is a bad thing, you know, here in terms of what happened. You know, I'm progressive in my mindset. But like, we haven't won, you know, like this, like, and you never win, you know, like, and, you know, and the struggle for mission, you know, for ethic, you know, and the work for healthcare are in care for welfare, right? Depending on the agencies we're talking about, right? That struggle is never going to end, you know, like, so, and like, I think we need to let ourselves know, almost feel some calm from that. Like, it's not depressing. It lets us know that that's the nature, that's the flawed nature of humanity. And we have to keep up our effort to work ourselves and our organizations towards their better halves.
Vernon?
Ver-
Yeah.
Hi, thank you for your talk. I was still not clear about one thing.
You and me both.
This diversion of funds, I'm guessing happens in many different ways, but if you could sort of quantify, I mean, how much is it individuals' financial benefits are being clawed back through corporations to county and state? How much are these large contractors basically providing a kickback to county and state? And how much is it county and state just taking a huge cut as overhead in providing funds to contractors or individual service providers?
Well, the great question. All of that is happening. And, you know, I think part of the alarm is we don't really know concrete numbers, right? That, you know, I found concrete examples, you know, like I can point out, like, you know, in Texas, you know, Governor Perry, when Rick Perry was governor of Texas, you know, who, you know, would, you know, vocally lambaste the federal government and especially any kind of federal aid for the poor, you know, engaged in these practices to maximize Medicaid and then route it to general coffers using disproportionate share hospitals. I believe, like, I need to look back, like I don't have it up in front of me. I believe it was like 1.7 billion within a 5-year period, right? So that's not small numbers that we're talking about in just one state and one of the practices using one variation of Medicaid. But it's a great point, you know, too, that it's both, sometimes it's, you know, like individual benefit. If you think Social Security benefits are like that, you know, the benefits that foster children would otherwise receive, that's taking an actual cash payment that they're supposed to receive and taking it from them. Medicaid, it's like we don't get a cash payment for Medicaid if we're eligible for Medicaid, right? It's funding that goes to from the federal government to the states to the providers, right? Ultimately with that through a whole complicated reimbursement process. So then, even though it's considered an entitlement, if you're eligible to the individual, you're not getting a cash benefit, but they're sort of, if you almost view it as a, you know, almost like plumbing, you know, of the cash flow, the counties and the revenue contractors have figured out a way to tap in, you know, so they're making money not just by providing the operational services, but by tapping into the source of the original cash flow, right? And it's hard. Like Oregon was doing this using nursing homes, and I'm not sure if it's still going on in Oregon, but they would route using the nursing homes to maximize the Medicaid payments, and then use it to fund public education. Right? I'm a fan of public education, right? But you're not supposed to fund public education by stealing money from, you know, poor nursing home residents, right? It's supposed to be used, you know, through a form of general taxation. You know, I'm against property taxes for that way. It should be general statewide taxation, but that's a whole different discussion. So Vernon, like it's hard. And I really think that's one of the unknown is one of the most alarming parts of this, right? And I'm not sure if we can know, you know, like I forget who the name, like we talked about before, the tobacco settlements, right? You know, we start to see examples of the grift with that, but are we ever going to fully know the full amount? You know, with this past year, the amount of money that's been funneling through the PPEs and all these other grants that have been provided under COVID, massive amounts of money, right? And we're never going to know where that money has gone. We might learn trickles of it and stories, you know, as the years move forward. See a hand from Jeremy Levinson.
Yeah.
Hi.
Thank you for your talk. I just wanted to kind of continue on the strategy set of questions and the kind of question of to whom or against whom should we be, you know, raising our fists and writing our petitions. And so I had two kind of specific questions.
Well, I'm a lawyer, so I'm going to say sue them all, right?
You know, so in LA at UCLA, there's been a wonderful project called $1 Million Hoods that's been tracking the amount of money that the public has dedicated to policing and incarceration in specific neighborhoods, just to show how much money is pouring in those particular settings. And so what's depressing about your talk, but it's also being, a lot of us know, is that once you take that money out, as it's starting to happen, which is wonderful, and put it into all the things that we think we want, education, healthcare, housing, it's then going to enter this grift where it may not actually see the people we want it to see, that the social welfare isn't, the system isn't set up for us to simply just move that money to where it needs to go. So one like specific question is, if you were building a kind of rubric of for the $1 Million Hoods or for a similar kind of initiative, and you wanted to ask simple questions of how much money is getting to the people that should receive it, what would those questions be?
Well, that's a great question. And I'm not familiar with the program, but it sounds wonderful. And I would like pause. I think there's sometimes there can be risk, and I sound like you get this, like with asking the question, like you look at nonprofits, right? We've seen criticism with a lot of nonprofits if the overhead numbers are too high, right? Well, it's not just about like for a nonprofit to run well, right? You need to have a level of overhead, right? You hopefully have a good amount of it, right? And you just use that administrative part of your mission really well and providing the services. But it depends on what type of programs you're talking about. Like if you're just looking in a community, a population in a community, and then I'm just very quickly brainstorming with you, but I would want to start breaking it down by type of services that are needed, right? And then looking at, well, all right, what's here now? What's the need, but where are the money sources coming from? And you almost have to start issue by issue, because each one is different, but then you'll start to see the connections, right? If you look at, prisoner reentry services as an issue, right? And you look at, well, what's the cause in the first place of the people who are incarcerated through a system of mass incarceration? What are the sources that are available or aren't available as they're coming out, and what's that competing against? Food stamps, what's happening with who runs the food stamp program, the SNAP program, sorry, in the jurisdiction, because even though this is federal funds, the SNAP program is run by local social services offices. So I don't feel like I'm giving you a good answer, but I think you just have to almost start really, that's where you do need to go narrow and start thinking about each individual service that's needed and start tracking money from there. To start.
That's really helpful. I mean, just kind of, yeah.
I know. Is there like a particular, like I don't know, like, are you focusing in on a particular piece of the services that is interest to you?
Not necessarily, but can I ask you a second part to a question, which
Sure.
is actually stepping super broad, because it's something that I feel like you might have a ton of insights into, because you're looking nationally and you're looking across so many different industries. Towards what Ippy was saying before, with respect to kind of how what seems to be in common is a general kind of neoliberalization of the public sector. How much a part of that process has also been, or how much do you see an anti-labor as a core tenet to the kind of patterns of this grift? I'm just thinking, as we imagine at the broad level what solutions could look like, public sector employment, public sector, and public sector unions would be the ones that would be defending public sector employment. So I'm just wondering, is there, in this kind of business model turn to the public sector and its cross-cutting, use of these funds, is there a general, is it a explicit, or is it just kind of an implicit orientation to be anti-labor and typically also anti-labor?
It's interesting, and I haven't looked into directly connections with the labor movement, but I have had folks reach out to me, because of some of what I've written about, like Maximus is one of the companies, and some of the others, Lockheed Martin, a big one, and they're interested, like in terms of like their advocacy within their efforts of their staff attorneys at the organization. But I've seen locally in Maryland, both at the state level and these county agencies, where there's an increasing trend to contract out, to reduce hiring of actual state employees with this. So that in itself is maybe more like that implicit pushback that's happening, and I think that's probably around the country. Now, a lot of times that's asserted as an excuse as well. There's funding cuts. We don't have the money. Well, you're now spending more money by contracting it out, to these, other companies are going to do it rather than just hire somebody who's staff, who has a pure mission to do it and is going to do better work, because they have the expertise. But it's a great question. I haven't really dug into that connection very deeply, but it's fascinating. It's problematic because, because you have both the, it's both like you have these, how do I word this? Like this world of the agency mission that's happening outside of it, those they're supposed to serve, but also internally, right? Where hopefully their employees are doing well at the same time. If you have a Department of Labor licensing and regulation, hopefully they're treating their own employees as well as what they're trying to provide services for, right, to their beneficiaries. But often that's not the case. You see that in institutions a lot of time, right? How we especially treat our folks who do not have tenure yet. Educational institutions. We need to look at ourselves while we're looking at others. Any other questions, comments? I could talk. I'd love to hear, I could talk just a little bit where I'm going with this next book. I would love to get any of your all's expertise or comments as I'm digging in. I'm sort of working on like a part 2, but looking at the broader justice system, focusing probably mainly on juvenile justice and the juvenile courts. But I'm finding, increasing examples where it's not just the fines and fees, but where the courts themselves are profiting, generating revenue from these same funding streams, right? That's what the child welfare agencies are, that the Medicaid agencies are, and the like. One of the examples that I've been digging into out of Ohio, the Ohio juvenile courts themselves have become contracted, right? So it's through this, I teach contracts too. It's through a mechanism called interagency contracts, where you have one branch of government, the executive branch, contracting with the judicial branch, right? Either for the executives to take on judicial functions or for the judiciary to take on executive branch functions. Either way, that's concerning, because in the Constitution, we're supposed to have this thing called separation of powers, right? And the courts are supposed to be independent and impartial. But in Ohio and some of the other states, what I'm finding is like the Ohio juvenile courts have actually contracted with the child welfare agency for the Ohio courts to become the direct recipients of these federal foster care funds, the 4E. They've become a foster care placement agency. So the courts are not only reviewing all these decisions, they're making placement decisions. They are the foster care agency. There's federal requirements in terms of the review of these proceedings, and you end up in a situation where the court is literally reviewing itself into decisions of removal and placement decisions. And every 6 months, you have this litany of things that are supposed to go through. Child support is even more massive than that, where we see like California is huge in terms of the interaction with the probation department and the juvenile courts in California, with how much child support is funding the entire justice system.
Yeah, just as feedback, what you're saying, works, as you can imagine, very accurately for mental health court, which is, a great thing to have. But at the same time, the judge isn't trained in psychiatry or social service treatment, for that matter,
right,
and is being forced by the system to all of a sudden make these extraordinary executive decisions that transform the lives of someone. And,
right.
and the judges aren't necessarily consistent across one another by any means, or consistent with their own defendees.
No,
even though many of them, the kind of judge that goes to mental health court is a much nicer judge than the typical judge.
That's a good thing. But are they actually judges, or do you encounter masters and like judicial referees and the like?
Here they're judges. I mean, we're such a big system and so rich with misspent funds, but it's one of the older mental health courts in America, and is super active and is being expanded to, which is good.
It's an interesting example. I'm seeing the same thing with prosecutors' offices as well. The same kind of contracts, and prosecutors are supposed to have prosecutorial discretion, right? That the ethics of a prosecutor is supposed to be even higher, if you will, than others in the legal profession, because their client is, it's not like this adversarial system where you represent client A versus client B. They're representing either the state or the county, depending on what level they are, and they're also supposed to represent justice, right? But if they are becoming monetized by the pursuit of the money, it's really, really problematic.
What's mind-boggling in mental health court is to see the judges talking to defendees about the side effects of their medications, because the psychiatrists aren't talking to the defendees about the side effects, to their patients about the side effects. And you, why is it the judge's duty to do this? The judge doesn't have a clue as to what the side effects are.
Do you still see, I know like this isn't a new story with the use of medication and sometimes overuse, right? And that's a hard balance, because it's the meds are needed a lot of times, but then when you hear of a 2-year-old child in foster care who's prescribed 5 psychotropic meds at the same time, that's not a good thing, right? So are you still seeing that as a trend of a concern, in California?
Yeah, absolutely. One sees that. Yeah, the poor get more meds.
Right. Interesting.
They're
Well,
very expensive, too.
Yeah, go ahead.
The medications are also very expensive, especially ones that aren't generic.
It's I mean, there's so many layers to this, right? And even where we start to see improvements, one of the things I'm struggling with this now is there have been, like, if you go back to foster care, there's always a tension amongst people who call themselves child advocates. What does that mean? Are you like a representative of the child, of the parents, of the agency, or all of the above? And there's those who are more in favor of pulling more children in foster care, because if there's a story of a child who's harmed, in their biological home, then the whole world is up in arms, and they want to bring all children into foster care. And then there's individuals who are more advocates that there are much too many children in the system. I tend to be in that. I'm not really view myself as a camp, but I tend to be on that side of things, if you will. But there's been efforts to improve that, and there a couple of years ago we had this Families First legislation that is supposed to give states more funding flexibility to provide services before children come into the system. The monies can also be used for children who are coming into contact with the juvenile justice system. So that's a good thing, to prevent children entering the system more deeply, right, or being pulled into the system more deeply. But what I'm starting to see is even those funds and services are being misused. They're being used as a business in itself. And you can see this picture is almost like funneling children through this never-ending process where probation is involved, and they're constantly a child who's now a foster care candidate, even though they're not in the system, constantly monetized. These are always children who are poor. The big funding stream of 4E, that's only available if the children come from poor families. It's linked to the old AFDC requirements, right? So it's like, it's a good thing, but it's creating a different business. So like when I start thinking about solutions and things, why I'm in favor of this legislative fix or against, it's like it's never simple. I think with this discussion, and I think that's hard for a lot of individuals when you start talking about these issues, these systems, the agencies. It's not like, I don't know how many times people ask me, like, well, okay, how do you fix it? What's your that's fine. What's your top solution? And it's like, well, how much time do you have, and like which issue are we talking about? And then you can speak, like it's all interconnected.
Okay, I'm going to wrap this up now because we are coming to the end of our time. But if Dan's willing to stay around a few more minutes. And if people have additional questions, please feel free to stay around a few more minutes.
Thank you, everybody, for
would say-
joining. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Hatcher, for presenting this extremely interesting talk. And as Philippe said, showing us how the rot has set in across the entire social welfare system, not only in the areas in which we're most familiar with us. Yes, people are applauding.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I can, as people sign off, if anybody has questions, I can hang out for a little bit, but no pressure for questions. I know
and we should repeat
it's happy hour on the East Coast. It's not quite there.
And here we'll repeat our thanks to the Leo Rangell Foundation for making these talks possible, as well as the Walter Chair and other funding that the center tries to survive on. Despite the neoliberalization of UCLA.
My thanks as well, and I promise not to dig into those funding streams. Right?
I know, it's incredible.
Yeah. And thank you, Dr. Meldrum, so much individually, Marcia, for setting this up, and to everybody and participating.
Thanks.
I'm impressed with this entire. I candidly did not know a lot about this particular division of UCLA, but
yeah,
we're relatively new.
Gives me hope.
Yeah, that's right. If we survive, we're relatively new.
Yeah.
And we have been joined by people all across the LA community who are interested in these issues. So it's.
Yeah, this was a nicely attended talk. So thank you for attracting so many people.
Great. Well, I'm glad to participate.
And many were psychiatrists. I mean, a disproportionate number, because we're based in a psychiatry department within the School of Medicine. So most of us are working on issues of mental illness. And because of the US, we link that with the prison system, the jail system.
Yeah, I think that's hard for, like, I can't imagine being in psychiatry now, like with barragement of both needs, and it's such an evolving field, and then layering on the medication issue and the desires from patients, right? And it can be so beneficial in some cases, but then in other cases not. And then if you're working for an institution where you're feeling pressured, it'd be difficult.
Well, the LA moment is very interesting politically, because there were a series of progressive votes that have put better leadership into power. And there's a movement for alternatives to incarceration that's sort of gained a certain amount of hegemony. The devil is going to work itself in the detail in the coming years, as you know better than most.
Yeah.
But the rhetoric, at least, is now less about punishing people than about taking care of them. Whether they'll actually get taken care of, we'll see how it gets structured. Because there just basically aren't that many services, there's just a lack of hospital beds and a lack of supportive housing. And the price of housing in LA is just so ridiculously expensive that all the positive things get contradicted by the laws of, for-profit housing.
Yeah, no, I think it's like I see this in Maryland and different places too, and like California being such a big state where you have the complexities of some uber rich areas, and those that just are not, at all wealthy, and they have urban versus rural, and the politics, and I can't imagine how difficult it must be in California to demand.
Well, it's a nice laboratory to study. It's an extraordinary place, and it is the quintessential dystopic utopia with its perfect weather and whatever, and its ability to attract people from all over the world.
If I've seen one hope for bipartisanship, it's chasing money, right? Because the issues that I've written about it happens in blue states and red states, and Democratic governors and Republican governors, across the boards. So I've had, multiple, like I had, staff from Ron Johnson's office in Wisconsin reach out to me trying to get me to participate in some, effort of theirs where they wanted to block grant Medicaid. And I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not on board with this, like but it's problematic, like where you have those who rise to a level of leadership, and the same thing happens in the agency. If they are good-minded, like they forget, some are purposeful in the grift, but then some, I think, just forget. And it becomes about the operations than it more so than the individuals and the purpose.
Well, we should probably not exhaust you too much.
Yeah. All
We
right,
should
guys.
let you go. We're actually some of us are gonna stay on for our incarceration, our October, our April organizing for the pandemic, incarceration in the pandemic. Legal.
More upbeat discussion.
Yes, right. That's right. Well, well, it's lawyers, so you would actually be great at this at this event, because we're putting lawyers and community advocates and survivors from prison on a panel.
That's
together.
excellent. No, what was hearing your future talks that are coming, they all sound excellent. So it's great. Well, it's great to meet you all, and I hope to stay connected either virtually or to meet you in person sometime.
Sure.
We
yeah.
We can travel again.
That's right.
Take care, everybody.
I had a quick question, but I'll email you, Dan. So
sure.
I'll get in
Anytime.
touch with you.
Sounds
Thank you.
good. Yep.
Take care, everybody.
Yes. Take care. Philippe, I think we actually have a different different link for this other meeting.